At 3:47 hours. Huichen Forest, Germany. December 14, 1944. The tree line exploded. He had 4 seconds. Private Elias Whitfield hit the frozen dirt as splinters of pine rained down like shrapnel. Somewhere behind him, a machine gun was chewing through the dark at a rate his ears already knew by heart. An MG-42, 1,100 rounds a minute, the sound less like gunfire and more like fabric tearing. His squad was gone. Not dead. Gone. Scattered into the black trees 20 minutes ago when the mortars found their position, and he hadn't seen a friendly face since. His left hand moved to his boot, just for a second. Then he picked up what remained of the weapon in front of him, a cracked Thompson, half its stock blown away, and he did not run. 23 years old. Private, lowest rank in the United States Army. A blacksmith's son from Autauga County, Alabama, who had been told by 3 different sergeants in 8 months that he didn't belong in this war. Not with a rifle, not with an opinion, not with a plan of his own. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, there was only math. 8 German soldiers, minimum, dug into the ridge above him. 1 American, alone, in the coldest forest in Europe, with a broken gun and no way home. You'll understand why he reached for his boot before you understand what's in it. But not yet. The forest around him held its breath. Somewhere close, a boot cracked a frozen branch. Whitfield didn't move. He didn't blink. He did the only thing a man does when the odds have already decided against him and he has decided to disagree. He waited for them to come to him. Like, share, and subscribe if forgotten soldiers deserve to be remembered. To understand what Private Elias Whitfield was about to do, you need to understand exactly what he was up against, because on paper, it wasn't a battle. It was a formality. The Huichen Forest, by December 1944, had already earned a name among American GIs. The Death Factory. Dense fir plantations, no visibility past 30 feet, mud that swallowed boots, and a German defense in depth that had been fortified for months. This was not open ground where American numbers and air power could win the day. This was a killing box designed by German engineers to negate every American advantage. 4:02 hours. Whitfield's platoon, attached to the 4th Infantry Division's push through the forest belt east of Wassenach, had been ambushed by a Kampfgruppe of the 275th Infantry Division, reinforced with SS Pioneer troops holding prepared bunker positions. The Germans had the high ground, pre-sighted mortar lines, and interlocking MG-42 fields of fire. Whitfield had a busted Thompson, 40 rounds of loose .45 ACP in his pockets, and no idea where the rest of his squad had gone. Enemy POV, OBERST HEINRICH VOSS, Ridge Command Post, 4:10 hours. Voss hears the report over the field telephone and doesn't look up from his map. 1 American, separated from his unit, still resisting near Sector 14. He has heard this before: stragglers who fire wildly into the dark until their nerve or their ammunition runs out, whichever comes first. He tells his adjutant to note the position and move on. There are 11 other points of contact tonight, and this one is not worth a company commander's attention. Erward sich Tachesen, he says. He'll shoot himself to death. He returns to the map. By 4:15, Whitfield's own company commander, Captain Reuben Hale, had already written the incident into his log as a probable loss. Radio contact was gone. The forest ate sound and swallowed flares. Hale gave the order to consolidate the line 200 yards back and hold, not push forward, not send a patrol. "We're not losing more men for one straggler in the dark," he told his XO. No one was coming for Elias Whitfield. Not that night. Maybe not ever. This is the gap you need to hold in your mind. 8 entrenched German soldiers with a heavy machine gun, mortar support on call, and a commander who didn't yet know the shape of the man he was facing, against one American private with a broken submachine gun, no radio, and a battalion that had already stopped counting him as alive. That is not an underdog story. That is a funeral nobody had written yet, before the forest, before the war. Before anyone called him Private Whitfield, he was just Eli, a boy who spent more hours in his father's forge than in the one-room schoolhouse 3 miles down the red dirt road. Autauga County, Alabama, 1931. His father, Samuel Whitfield, ran the only working forge for 12 miles, shoeing mules and mending plow blades for farmers who paid him in eggs and firewood as often as coin. Eli grew up in that heat, the orange glow, the ring of hammer on iron, the smell of scorched hoof and coal smoke that never quite left his clothes. His father never said much. He wasn't a man built for speeches, but he taught Eli to read metal the way other men read scripture, to understand that steel remembers everything done to it, every fold, every strike, every temperature it survived. "Metal doesn't lie to you," Samuel used to say. "People do. Metal just tells you what it's been through." The flashback plays soft, sepia-warm. A 9-year-old Eli standing on an overturned crate, gripping a hammer too big for his hands, his father's rough palm closing over his to guide the strike. Sparks scatter like fireflies. "Again," his father says, not unkind, just certain. It was in that forge at age 11 that Eli reached for a glowing iron rod he'd been told 3 times to let cool, because he wanted to see if he could bend it faster while it still held color. His father's shout came a half-second too late. The metal seared across his right palm before he even registered the pain, a deep, curling burn that scarred white and raised, a permanent brand across the lifeline of his hand. His father didn't scold him again after that. He simply wrapped the hand himself in silence and the next morning handed him a smaller hammer. "Now you know what it costs to rush," he said. "Don't forget it." Eli never did. For the rest of his life, whenever a decision had weight, whenever the moment demanded he choose and live with the choosing, his thumb found that scar, pressed into it, and steadied him. It became less a wound than a compass. The abuse started the day he enlisted. Not the war, the army itself. At Fort Benning, a training sergeant looked at his enlistment papers, looked at his face, and reassigned him to a quartermaster company without asking whether he could shoot, because boys like you carry crates, not rifles. It took 11 months, a training accident that left a white sergeant short-handed on a live-fire range, and Eli quietly, without asking permission, stripping and reassembling a jammed Browning automatic rifle in under 90 seconds, faster than anyone in the company had ever done it, before anyone even considered moving him to infantry. Even then, the transfer order mysteriously sat on a desk for 6 weeks. The slurs were a daily weather system, not an event. Men who wouldn't share a canteen with him would gladly hand him a broken carbine to fix and take credit for it afterward. He learned to expect his name left off after-action reports. He learned that his competence made some men angrier, not more respectful, because it meant their assumptions had been wrong, and wrong men rarely forgive the one who proves it. What none of them knew was that Eli didn't fix weapons because he wanted their approval. He fixed them because, in his hands, a rifle was the one thing in this army that never lied to him back. Metal didn't care what color made the strike. Metal only cared if you understood it. His baby brother, Josiah, had died of pneumonia in the winter of 1938, 11 years old, too far from a hospital that would treat a black child quickly enough to match her. Eli carried that with him the way he carried the scar, quiet, permanent, present in every decision. He fought in the truest sense so that some other family's youngest boy might get the help that came too late for his own. By the time he reached the Huichin, Private Elias Whitfield had earned a private, unspoken reputation among the handful of men willing to see it. Give him a broken weapon, any weapon, and somehow it worked better than it ever had knew. If a story like this deserves to be remembered, hit subscribe before we go back into the dark. For 21 hours. Whitfield moved through the tree line on his belly, the cracked Thompson useless past 30 feet with its stock gone. He tried a controlled burst at the nearest silhouette and the bolt jammed on the 9th round. Cold-soaked lubricant, thickened to paste. His first attempt at fighting back had failed before it started. By 4:48 hours, he had been spotted. A flare went up bone white, turning the forest into a photograph of itself, and for 3 full seconds Elias Whitfield had nowhere to hide. A round caught him high in the left shoulder, not a clean pass-through, but a tumbling fragment that tore muscle and lodged near the scapula. He went down hard into a frozen drainage ditch, and for a moment the only sound in the world was his own breathing, ragged and too loud. He waited for reinforcement that he already knew, somewhere under the pain, was not coming. Captain Hale's line had pulled back. Whitfield had heard the withdrawal order crackle faintly on a dying radio an hour earlier, not meant for him, not answering him, just abandoning the ground he was bleeding on. His own command had written him off before the sun rose. By 9:30 hours, he had used his one field dressing and torn a strip from his undershirt for a second. The wound was still bleeding, slower now, dark and thick in the cold. His fingers on his left hand had stopped responding well to command. The fragment had done something to the nerve. At 11:40 hours, he found the German soldier, young, no older than 19, separated from his own unit and wounded worse than Whitfield, a leg shattered by what looked like their own mortar fire landing short. The boy spoke no English. Whitfield spoke almost no German. What passed between them needed neither. This is the moment the record does not make comfortable, and we will not make it comfortable for you either. Whitfield needed to know where the rest of the German position was, how many men, how many guns, where the ammunition was stored. He propped the wounded boy against a tree, gave him water from his own canteen, and made it clear, through gesture and the leveled barrel of a captured Kar 98K, that the boy would walk in front of him toward his own lines, not as a prisoner escorted to safety, as a shield, as a guide who could not refuse. The boy understood. His face told Whitfield he understood exactly what it meant, that if his own side saw him walking an American toward their position, or refused to fire because of who was walking beside him, There would be no mercy for a German soldier who had, in their eyes, led the enemy in. Whitfield did not explain himself. He did not apologize. He simply nodded toward the tree line and began walking, the boy limping ahead of him, and did not look back at what that choice might cost. 1347 hours. He hadn't eaten in 31 hours. The boy led him, whether from fear or resignation, close enough to see the bunker complex. 3 MG-42 nests, a mortar pit, and a supply cache stacked with weapons stripped from dead men on both sides of the line. A working Kar 98K with an intact scope, 2 abandoned MP-40s, a crate of Panzerfaust rounds, and critically, an American bar someone had dragged off a body and never bothered to destroy. Enemy POV, OBERSD HEINRICH VOSS, Ridge Command Post, 14:02 hours. Voss receives a second report, and this one makes him set down his coffee. The straggler is still alive. Worse, one of his own reconnaissance men is missing, last seen retreating toward the American lines with a wounded conscript. Voss has fought since Poland. He has never lost a soldier to a man who was, by every tactical measure, already dead 6 hours ago. "Send a squad," he tells his adjutant, and for the first time his voice has an edge that wasn't there before. "I want to know what this one man is doing out there." Alone in a collapsed forward observation post half buried by an earlier mortar strike, Whitfield began to build. His hands, the burned one steadying the work, thumb pressed briefly into the old scar before every cut, stripped the jammed Thompson down to its receiver and dropped it. Beyond salvage. What he had instead, the captured Kar 98K with its intact Zeiss scope, the American bar's heavier automatic action and its box magazine, and one of the MP-40s for its faster cycling bolt components. The problem was simple and brutal. The bar hit hard and could sustain fire, but its 20-round magazine ran dry too fast for a man alone with no resupply. The Kar 98K could reach out with accuracy no submachine gun could match, but it fired one round at a time too slow for what was coming. The MP-40 cycled fast, but its pistol-caliber rounds wouldn't punch through the timber revetments the Germans had built into their bunker line. He needed reach. He needed sustained fire. He needed stopping power. No single weapon in that pile gave him all three. So he took the bar's heavier barrel and gas-operated action as his foundation, the platform capable of automatic fire that wouldn't melt itself apart in the cold. He cannibalized the Kar 98K's scope mount, and using a section of steel banding stripped from an ammunition crate and the pliers from his field kit, cold-fitted the Zeiss optic onto an improvised rail welded, in truth, more accurately clamped and wired under field-expedient tension, to the bar's receiver, aligning it by eye against a fence post 40 yards out, adjusting for the drop he already understood instinctively from a lifetime of judging distance and weight by hand. From the MP-40, he pulled the recoil spring assembly lighter, faster cycling than the bar's factory spring, and fitted it into the bar's action, a substitution that violated the tolerances the weapon was designed for and that any ordnance officer would have called reckless. It shortened the bar's cycle time, letting it spit rounds faster, at the cost of increased where that Whitfield knew the weapon might not survive past a few hundred rounds. He didn't need it to last. He needed it to last today. The sound of his tools working in that freezing dugout was small and precise against the war outside it, the click of the pliers, the scrape of steel on steel, his own breathing shallow against the pain in his shoulder. Once, his hand slipped on the wet metal and the old burned scar caught against a sharp edge. He didn't stop, didn't flinch outwardly, just pressed his thumb into the scar the way he always had and kept working. Visual cue. Extreme close-up on hands, scarred palm, blood-slicked steel, breath fogging in the cold, intercut with a schematic diagram showing the three donor weapons merging into one silhouette. He test-fired at once, muffled against his shoulder to keep the sound contained, aimed at a fence post 40 yards out. The round struck 2 inches high and left of where the Kar 98K's sights alone would have placed it, close enough. He adjusted the mount with a folded scrap of canvas as a shim and fired again. Dead center. It worked. Enemy POV OBRSDHEINRICHVOSS, Ridge Command Post, 15-20 hours. The squad Voss sent does not report back on schedule. When contact finally comes, it is a single wounded man, crawling, saying words that do not fit together in Voss's understanding of the battlefield. A sound like a machine gun, but firing single shots that never miss, from a position no one could locate. Voss walks to the map alone and stares at it for a long moment. He says nothing to his adjutant. There is nothing tactical to say. For the first time since 1940, Oberst Heinrich Voss feels something he has no German military term for. He orders the perimeter doubled. He does not explain why. By 1610 hours, 3 separate German patrols had moved toward Whitfield's position, tightening the noose paragraph by paragraph. He was cut off completely now. The wounded German boy had vanished during the confusion, and whatever became of him afterward was never recorded. Whitfield's shoulder had stiffened to the point his left arm could barely brace the weapon's forward grip. He had 11 rounds of bar ammunition left, 4 Kar 98K rounds, and a body that had stopped shivering, which his father, had he been a medic instead of a blacksmith, would have recognized as a warning sign far worse than the shivering itself. There was a moment, alone in that dugout with the light fading and the cold pressing into the bullet wound like a fist, when Elias Whitfield stopped believing he would walk out of that forest. He sat with his back against frozen earth, the hybrid rifle across his knees, and simply breathed. His right hand found his boot. He didn't remove what was folded inside it. He never did. He just pressed his palm flat against the leather over the small photograph of his little brother in a baseball uniform, grinning at a camera 8 years and 1 continent away, and he held it there. Something in him settled, not hope exactly, something steadier than hope, a decision. He stood up. If you're still with him, you already know what comes next. Subscribe. You don't want to miss what happens at dusk. 1847 hours. Full dark. The Germans moved in 3 coordinated squads, converging on the collapsed observation post from the north, east, and south. A textbook envelopment, the kind that works against a wounded, exhausted, alone man 99 times out of 100. Elias Whitfield was the 100th. The first peak came fast, almost too fast to process. He let the northern squad close to 18 yards before opening up, And the hybrid rifle did something none of them expected: automatic fire with a rifle round's punch, at a rate no bar gunner had ever managed, because the stolen MP40 spring inside it was cycling faster than its designers ever intended. 4 men went down before the rest scattered for cover. The weapon he'd built in a frozen hole in the ground, from 3 broken things that shouldn't have fit together, was working beyond anything he'd dared to test. 1901 hours. The second peak arrived as failure. The overstressed action, pushed past its tolerances exactly as he'd feared, seized on a double feed. He was down to the Kar 98K action alone, single shot, his wounded arm barely able to work the bolt, and the Eastern squad was 40 yards out and closing with a machine gun crew setting up in the open. For one long, terrible moment, it looked finished. A round clipped the earth beside his head. He tasted copper and dirt and heard, distinctly, his own heartbeat over everything else. 1917 hours. Stop. Look at what just happened. Huichin Forest Sector, December 14, 1944, 1847 to 1917 hours. Before, enemy position. 23 soldiers across 3 converging squads, 2 MG42 emplacements, 1 mortar pit in support, holding roughly 400 meters of fortified ridge ground. Friendly forces available to Private Whitfield. 1 man, 1 improvised hybrid rifle of uncertain reliability, 11 rounds of ammunition remaining at contact. After, enemy casualties confirmed: 14 killed, 6 wounded and captured, 3 fled the position, ground retaken. The forward observation ridge, later used to anchor the regiment's renewed advance. American lives saved estimated between 60 and 90, based on the projected casualties of the planned dawn assault. The ridge position would otherwise have shredded, ammunition expended by protagonist. All 11 rounds, plus 4 Kar 98K rounds, plus the contents of 2 enemy magazines recovered mid-fight. Time elapsed: 30 minutes. 1 man. Those numbers. Sit with that. The third peak came in silence, not noise. With the jammed bar action useless and only the bolt-action Kar 98K component still firing, Whitfield did the one thing none of the converging German soldiers accounted for. He stopped moving entirely, went still against the frozen earth in the dark, and waited, the same patience his father had beaten into him at a forge, the same stillness that had let a scared 11-year-old learn that rushing costs you everything. His right hand moved to his boot one final time. He didn't unfold the photograph. He simply pressed his palm flat against it, felt the shape of it through the leather, and in that half-second, something in him went quiet the way the forest itself had gone quiet before the ambush that started this all. Then he moved. He let the last squad walk within 15 feet before the final 4 rounds found their marks, not wild, not desperate, each one placed with the same care his father once demanded of a hammer strike on hot iron. When the 4th German fell, there was no 5th. The ridge was his. Enemy POV, OBERSDHEINRICHVOSS, Ridge Command Post, 1922 HOURS. Voss stands over the radio as the casualty count comes in, and he does not raise his voice. He does not order a counterattack. he understands, with the clarity of a man who has commanded soldiers for 5 years, that there is nothing left on that ridge to counter. He turns to his adjutant, and what he says is quiet, almost private. Ein Mann hat das getan. One man did this. He will repeat that sentence in different rooms for the rest of his life, not as an excuse, but as the only explanation he ever found sufficient. And then, nothing, just smoke, and a man still standing. The forest didn't celebrate. There was no cheering, no flare fired in triumph, only the wind moving through broken pine branches and Elias Whitfield, bleeding, alone, standing over ground that 11 hours earlier his own command had already grieved him for. When American patrols finally reached the ridge at first light, they found him sitting against the frozen earth, the ruined hybrid rifle across his lap, conscious but barely. No one who was there that morning ever fully described his face to the official record. Several of them tried, years later, and none of the words felt like enough. If that silence hit you the way it hit them, share this before the next section. It matters. The ridge Elias Whitfield held alone became the anchor point for the 4th Infantry Division's renewed push through that sector of the Huichin 3 days later. A push that, according to the division's own after-action reports, faced dramatically lighter resistance than intelligence had projected, precisely because the forward German defensive line east of Wassenach had been broken before it could be reinforced. Captain Hale, the same officer who had written Whitfield off in his log that night, submitted him for a Silver Star. The recommendation moved through 3 review boards over the following 4 months and was quietly downgraded, without explanation on the record, to a Bronze Star with no personal citation attached, a pattern so common for black soldiers in this war that historians would spend the next 80 years trying to correct it, one buried file at a time. Witness testimony, Corporal Antonberger, formerly 275th Infantry Division. Account given 1952. Berger, captured 2 days after the ridge fell and later resettled in the United States, gave a written account decades afterward for a Regimental Historical Society newsletter. He remembered the American soldier only briefly, from a distance, through the trees. A single detail stayed with him for the rest of his life. Before the final exchange of fire, he said, the American went completely still for nearly a full minute, one hand pressed to his own boot, as though praying to something none of them could see. Berger said he never forgot that stillness. He said it frightened him more than the gunfire that followed it. The wounded German conscript Whitfield had used as an unwilling guide that afternoon was never accounted for in any surviving record, American or German. Whether he made it back to his own lines, was captured, or was executed by his own command for the appearance of collaboration, no document has ever confirmed. Whitfield himself, in the handful of conversations he gave about that day decades later, never once mentioned the boy by name and never explained what became of him. He simply said once to a nephew who asked, "I did what the day required. I don't ask you to feel good about that part." He returned to Autauga County in the autumn of 1945, worked his father's forge for another 11 years, and never once corrected a local newspaper article in 1953 that mistakenly credited a white lieutenant with organizing the successful Ridge defense during the Huichin campaign. He raised 4 children. He shod mules on the same anvil his father had used. He rarely spoke about the war at all, and never once, by any surviving account, spoke about what he did to get that wounded German boy walking in front of him. The small photograph of his younger brother Josiah, folded and carried through 11 months of combat, survived the war exactly as it began, tucked, unremoved in the same left boot. His family kept it after his death in 1988, and today it sits, still folded along the same creases, in a shadow box in his granddaughter's home in Montgomery, Alabama, alongside the bronze star that should have been a silver star, and a photograph of the forge that raised him. This is the kind of story that history almost lost. Comment his name below before we close this out. Elias Whitfield never asked to be remembered. Men who are erased rarely get the choice to ask. What he built that night in a collapsed dugout in the Huichin forest, 3 broken weapons made into one that worked, held together by wire, pressure, and a blacksmith's understanding of what steel can survive, was never studied by an ordnance board, never entered into a manual, never given a name. It existed for 30 minutes on a frozen ridge, and then it was gone. The way most true things about that war were gone, folded into silence by men who preferred the official version. There is one thing the record does not show. 3 weeks after the Huichin campaign ended, an unidentified German officer's body was recovered nearly 4 miles east of the ridge Whitfield had held. No unit insignia intact, no papers on the body. Cause of death never conclusively determined by the recovery team's brief report. No American patrol in that sector logged any contact in that area during that window. No one has ever explained who he was, or how he came to be there, or why. No one ever asked Elias Whitfield about it either, not in the 4 decades he lived afterward, not in the 2 interviews he gave, not even the year before he died. He never brought it up himself. Maybe it means nothing, or maybe it means everything. If this story found you, if this name meant nothing to you an hour ago, and now it means something, then leave his name in the comments. Just his name, nothing else. Let's build him a memorial right here in this comment section where history forgot to put one. Subscribe, because there are hundreds more of them, forgotten, waiting, and they deserve to be found.